Obesity has become very prevalent, if not rampant, in the United States in the past few decades. Several years ago, that was not necessarily true. However, with the proliferation of fast foods, two-parent working households, and digital entertainment at home, patients are becoming more sedentary, exercising less, and paying the price. The result has been a massive increase in the number of obese Americans. Obesity causes many parallel health issues. These include diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, particularly high triglycerides. Obese patients suffer more frequently from arthritis, particularly in the knees and the hips. It is not unusual for obese patients to have a higher incidence of back pain. Obese patients also have difficulty ambulating, walking, suffer from sleep apnea, and tend to die earlier of heart attacks and strokes. The additional weight that obese patients carry with them results in difficulty shopping and going about daily activities. If you do not happen to be obese, imagine that if you were obese, it would be the equivalent of walking around with a dumbbell in each hand and trying to get your daily activities performed. In severe circumstances, where patients are 50, 75, or 100 pounds obese, for the non-obese population, it would be like walking around with 25 to 50-pound dumbbells in both the right and left hands. Certainly, any significant amount of exertion or movement would result in shortness of breath, and this extra load puts stress on the cardiovascular and respiratory systems. Obesity does, indeed, run in families. We are not aware of any single gene that can predict obesity. However, that work is in progress through genetic testing. But the good news is that we really don't need a genetic test to tell us if we are obese. We can look and see. Certainly, obesity tends to be more prevalent in certain ethnic groups. It is our understanding that obesity is more prevalent in those of Hispanic heritage, in those whose ancestry dwelled in extremely cold environments, such as Eskimos, and in some other ethnic subpopulations. We cannot cite a specific resource. However, a quick Google search will confirm the accuracy of that statement. Obesity is a disease in and of itself, and it can, in part, be blamed to a degree upon your parents. So, in that sense, if you happen to be obese, you can lay some of the blame on your mother and father. In certain populations of patients, obesity is a direct result of lifestyle choices and personal behavior. And this is becoming more of an issue with readily available fast foods, remote controls to televisions, and creature comforts. Every person is an individual and is wired differently. We are sure that you have some friends that have high energy and some friends who are generally of lower energy. There are patients who prefer to watch television or video games as opposed to going out and exercising. There are also certain people who would choose exercising over sitting on the couch and being comfortable. According to various sources, the incidence of obesity increases as we age. As a matter of fact, many of the instruments used to measure percentage of body fat automatically add additional percentages for prediction of percent body fat with incremental aging. This might be because we store fat easier as we age. Also as we age, particularly as we get beyond the mid-20s, without resistance training type exercise, we tend to lose muscle strength, also known as lean body mass. Muscle, unlike fat, called adipose tissue, requires more energy throughout the day and burns more calories than storages of tissue fat. So there are incidences where patients may not gain weight as measured on a weight scale, but rather gain fat and are fooled into thinking that their percentage of body fat is stable. This is very true for an aging population because of our genetic programming to lose muscle mass as we age. Some of the loss of muscle mass has been proven scientifically to be slowed by resistance-type exercise training, commonly referred to as weightlifting, or other exercises performed against a load, but the activity has to be consistent to be effective. Certain medications can contribute to the probability that some patients develop obesity. Some of the more common medicines that can contribute to obesity include those medicines that have psychotropic effects. By psychotropic effects, we're talking about certain antidepressants and anxiety medications. Prednisone, a common medication we give for those with rheumatoid arthritis, allergic diseases, or autoimmune diseases, also tends to cause truncal obesity. Truncal obesity is obesity that spares the limbs and deposits primarily around the body itself. Biochemical issues within the body can also play a role in causing or worsening obesity. Here, we are speaking specifically in terms of low T in men and an underactive thyroid gland, where low thyroid hormone levels are diagnosed. This condition is called hypothyroidism. Hypothyroidism contributes to and is a cause of obesity in certain individuals, and also robs the patient afflicted with the disease of motivation and a drive to exert his or herself. Many causes of obesity are lifestyle-induced, however, and are of gradual onset. Now, for the more scientific part of the discussion, we will mention some scientific data that might be of use. It is impossible to get away from the equation of total calories ingested minus total calories burned equals either gaining, maintaining, or losing weight. Patients who consistently run a daily caloric deficit, extrapolated over days, weeks, or months, lose weight. Patients who take in more calories through food consistently than they burn throughout their daily lives put on weight. The excessive weight can be stored as either muscle or fat, also known as adipose tissue. Recall that muscle is described as lean body tissue, and muscle is generally considered healthy body mass. The USDA, many years ago, recommended a food pyramid that limited fat intake, moderated protein intake, and emphasized carbohydrate intake. The USDA has reconsidered the food pyramid that was issued so many years ago. The reason for this reconsideration has a scientific basis. It has been noted in recent years that patients who have followed the USDA historical recommended food pyramid has generated millions of Americans who are clinically diagnosed as being mildly, moderately, or severely obese. This astonishing revelation has resulted in scientific reanalysis of the recommended proportions of fat, proteins, and carbohydrates in our diets as outlined later in the video. There are several metrics to determine if you are obese. One of the more common metrics is the use of body mass index, also known as BMI. The normal BMI ranges have been set by expert panels who deal with these certain issues. Generally, a normal BMI ranges from a low of 18.5 to a high of 24.9. Obesity is defined as a BMI greater than 30, though this can be misleading. The BMI is predicated upon an equation that takes into account your height and your weight. There are more sophisticated ways to determine if you are obese that involve the measurement of the impedance of electrical stimuli that can be generated through a machine. As fat stores increase, the impedance to a slight electrical impulse is affected in such a way that scientists and physicians can approximate your percentage of body fat. This equation does take into account your age in most algorithms. The diagnosis of obesity is brought into question using traditional methods, particularly the BMI method, because that method does not take into consideration how much muscle mass you have and how big and dense your bone structure is. These are glaring deficits in relying totally on the BMI to determine if a patient is obese. This might be humorous, however, we have found it, in my 24 years of practicing medicine, to be rather accurate. The flashlight belly button test. We're not joking when we say this. Many patients believe that as you age, their belly buttons sink inward. This is not the case. The belly button actually stays put. It does not retract further into your abdominal cavity. However, in those who have gained weight in the abdominal region, the additional fatty tissue around the belly button, also known as the umbilicus, gives the appearance of a sunken belly button, when in reality it is the fat over the belly button that makes it appear that way. So, with tongue-in-cheek, we state that if you need a flashlight to see your belly button, then you may well have some obesity. All patients are individuals, and we are genetically programmed at birth to put on weight in various distributions anatomically throughout the body structure. Some patients put on weight in the abdominal area, some from the hips down, some put on weight just in the truncal area, and some patients put on weight circumferentially, or all over. The rule of thumb, however, is that the location where the last bit of adipose tissue was added will be the first place it will be removed when a calorie deficit is run over a period of time. So, in other words, last on, first off applies to weight loss. Again, this is genetically determined at birth, unless you happen to be on certain medications like prednisone. It is common knowledge that millions of Americans struggle with their weight and their percentage of body fat. As physicians, we are much more concerned with percentage of body fat than your total body weight because of your bone structure and the amount of lean body tissue you might have. For example, a weightlifter who consistently exercises in the form of weightlifting might have a BMI that defines him or her as being obese, when, in reality, their percentage of body fat is relatively low. This is not an uncommon finding. Likewise, it is possible to appear relatively thin, but have entirely too much body fat. This is true in people who are genetically thin and have very little muscle mass, but yet do not appear visually to be obese. Physiologists who study human anatomy and physiology have defined 3 genetic variabilities of body types that you might find interesting to be aware of. We state up front that few, if any, single person is a complete physiologic type in its entirety, but rather usually a percentage and mixture of 1, 2, or all 3. And we will list them. Patients who are genetically gifted and have a relatively high proportion of lean body tissue, deemed body mass, are referred to as mesomorphs. Patients who tend towards being relatively thin, with little muscle mass, and are usually a little bit taller, are referred to as ectomorphs. Patients who tend toward being overweight and storing excess body fat, whether regionally or diffusely, are generally referred to as endomorphs. As a patient, you can be a combination of meso, ecto, or meso-endo, or tend towards more of an endomorph or an ectomorph. There are no specific genetic tests that we are aware of that can make this determination. This is simply a visual supposition based on the appearance of the body habitus. There is nothing you can do to change your genetic proclivities. Now, for more scientific information, we need to clarify certain biomedical and physiological facts. The foods that we eat contain either carbohydrates, which are generally used to produce energy, proteins, which are used to support the maintenance and building of lean body tissue such as muscle, and fat. Fat, again, is referred to as adipose tissue. From a paleological standpoint, way back in caveman days, there was a genetic advantage for people who stored fat easily during the abundant times of the year and made it through the winters, using the excess fat on their bodies to survive the cold winters. So the ability to store fat was critical in our development, particularly before grocery stores were readily available. This might be why Eskimos, when food is plentiful, tend to have less satiety after eating and tend towards a higher body mass index or become obese. Some of the genetic proclivities are beyond the scope of this discussion, but it is clear that genetics play a significant role in obesity. Another source of energy that is ingested is alcohol. Alcohol is metabolized by the liver in several ways. The endpoint of that metabolism is that energy is extracted from alcohol. If the energy extracted from the ingestion of alcohol is not burned off through activity, it will be stored as fat. So the term beer belly is real, in a sense. To complete your education regarding nutrition, you need to understand that there are differences in the amount of energy in any given amount of carbohydrate, protein, fat, or alcohol taken in. Carbohydrates generally have about 4 calories of energy per gram. The calorie is the way we measure the amount of energy in food once it is digested. Protein, as you would find in lean meat or fish, has 4 calories per gram. Fat, however, as would be found on the side of a steak, and is clearly identifiable, has about 9 calories per gram, as does alcohol. So, if you were to eat a gram of a white potato, which is all carbohydrate, your body would receive 4 calories of energy for that amount eaten. If you were to eat a gram of pure protein, such as in fish that has a very low fat content or extremely lean red meat, chicken, or turkey, that gram of protein will result, upon digestion, into the delivery to the body of 4 calories of energy. If you were to eat a gram of pure fat, the digestion of that 1 gram of fat will release 9 calories of energy. Likewise, the ingestion of 1 gram of alcohol will result in the creation of approximately 9 calories of energy. We mention this because no one can escape the calories in equal calories burned equal stable weight. Anytime calories in exceeds calories burned for any protracted period of time, weight will be stored in the form of fat. This is true if there is no increase in lean body tissue or muscle mass generated through resistance-type exercise routines. Now that we've cleared up some of the causes of obesity and have gotten the biomedical and metabolic issues dealt with, we will focus our attention on how to combat obesity. We read in a book years ago that obese patients had one of two options. These two options were that the patient could either suffer from feeling like they were starving most of the time, or they could exercise heavily. In other words, there was no in-between. We no longer believe this statement is accurate. Our recommendation to gradually attack the obesity problem is to take advantage of a few scientific facts. The first fact is that there are approximately 3,600 calories in a pound of stored fat on your person. That means that in order to lose 1 pound of fat, you'll have to run a 3,600 calorie deficit over a certain period of time. That time period generally needs to be much longer than a day, because if it's done through severe calorie restriction, then your body will ravage your muscles to create necessary carbohydrates to function. It is good news, however, that gradual reduction in daily caloric intake relative to caloric expenditure, such that a deficit in calories ingested is created, will over time result in the reduction and the percentage of body fat. As complex as this topic can get, we have enormous success with our Svelte weight loss clinic at our office. What follows is a summary of the program we have devised that has proven itself to be very successful. Before outlining the Svelte program in detail, however, we want to emphasize that routine nearly daily exercise, whether aerobic or strength training, or better yet a combination of the two, should be performed once cleared by your physician to do so. If you have a host of risk factors of heart disease, to include the presence of smoking, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, age over 40, and a family history of heart disease, then we strongly recommend that you discuss this with your physician before embarking on a routine of a fairly intense exercise regimen. It is also imperative that if you exercise, you do it consistently. In order to do it consistently, we recommend that you ease into the exercise program incrementally and not jump into a very intense level at the very beginning. If you do this, you will be so sore that you will not be able to exercise the next time, and it will become rapidly discouraging. Our Svelte program, which stands for Scientific Very Effective Lean Transformative Experience, is predicated on two facts. These two facts are that patients afflicted with obesity generally eat way too many carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are addictive. And that they generally do not exercise enough, nor do they exercise correctly. It is our goal to clarify this for you in the remainder of this discussion. The most important statement that few understand is that carbohydrates are addictive. So we really have two instruments at our disposal to lower your percentage of body fat that are very effective. One instrument is exercise that comes under the heading of aerobic and resistance training. And the other is to decrease the amount of carbohydrates in your diet, which have been proven to be somewhat addictive. By addictive, we do not mean a chemical dependency, such as might occur if you were an alcoholic or addicted to some sort of medication. And when you break that addiction, your daily caloric intake will go down a lot. The simple fact is that, through our experience and the experience of others, the more carbohydrates you eat, particularly the simple sugars, the more carbohydrates you are likely to want the following day. Having said that, the reverse is true, and we have proven this through our Svelte program. One of our patients lost 55 pounds of fat over 5 months by breaking her carbohydrate addiction. In her case, it was the sugar in soft drinks. In order to break the carbohydrate addiction, patients need to understand which foods have carbohydrates in them and which foods do not. This information can be readily obtained at many websites that already exist on the internet, and we will not be specifically outlining them here. We do, however, want to draw your attention to a few. Some carbohydrates are generally considered to be good for you. Other carbohydrates are not very good for you. The good carbohydrates are generally in the form of whole grain foods. The bad carbohydrates are those that contain sugar, or are nearly immediately converted to sugar upon swallowing, such as white bread, non-whole grain wheat bread, white potatoes, rice, and most types of pasta. If you happen to exercise, particularly aerobically, then you will need to eat carbohydrates in order to perform. If you do not exercise, then it is absolutely necessary that you break your carbohydrate addiction by eliminating these foods from your diet. If you have diabetes, however, you will need to speak with your physician to adjust your diabetic medication prior to embarking on a low-carbohydrate diet. This is necessary to avoid a potentially dangerous circumstance that involves low blood sugar levels called hypoglycemia. Symptoms of low blood sugar vary and don't always occur, but include sweating, shaking, and nausea and nervousness and confusion. So the carbohydrate addiction can be broken. However, it generally takes 3 to 4 weeks and maybe sometimes a little longer. We have witnessed firsthand several patients breaking their carbohydrate addiction and losing in excess of 30 pounds. It has been our experience that patients who have broken their carbohydrate addiction tend to keep it broken and have empowered themselves and regained control of their lives. In order to break the carbohydrate addiction, you will not only have to know which foods to avoid, but also have to execute the strategy of avoiding them. That means that you have to resist temptation for a while. The good news is, once you have broken that addiction, the temptation to recidivate or resume excessive carbohydrate consumption lessens with each passing day. This is particularly true as it pertains to sugar-laden soft drinks and other beverages of that nature. Our program pretty much inverts the USDA food pyramid and turns it upside down, and we try to do this without being too extreme. In the initiation phase of our program, once we know you do not have diabetes, we recommend an extremely restricted carbohydrate diet, as low as 400 calories a day, which would be the equivalent of 100 grams of dietary carbohydrates. We recommend lean, grass-fed beef, fish, or chicken. We do not recommend pork unless it is lean. We do not want you to have a protein calorie deficiency because this will result in medical issues moving forward. We also want you to eat healthy fats. Healthy fats are those that contain omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids in ratios that are favorable, generally in a 3-to-1. We would also like you to avoid trans fats, the consumption of which has been associated with the development of heart disease. Don't forget that alcohol has calories. You can starve all you want, but if you drink too much alcohol, you will likely fail. While you are breaking your carbohydrate addiction by eating less of these carbohydrate-rich foods, your daily caloric consumption will decrease. We do not recommend that you eat an excessive amount of saturated or other fat. However, we do allow the consumption of some. We also want to draw your attention to the fact that dairy products, particularly milk, contain sugar. The sugar in milk is called lactose. When broken down, it is a carbohydrate. Milk, however, does contain a good source of calcium and protein. Though we do not recommend any particular diet on the market, our recommended diet is an amalgamation of what has been termed the paleo or Atkins-type diet, hybridized with a little Mediterranean-type diet mixed in as well. We do at all times, however, avoid extremes and give you real foods that you can buy at any grocery store. It's all about smart choices. At the conclusion of this talk, and available with the transcript of this talk, will be supplied appropriate foods. We do not recommend heavy exercise while breaking your carbohydrate addiction, which usually takes about a month. Once the carbohydrate addiction is broken, we begin an exercise regimen that is essentially equal in terms of aerobic training, such as walking on a treadmill or around the mall, and some strength training. We do the strength training to preserve lean body tissue and to keep your basal metabolic rate high. That last term simply means how many calories you burn a day just living and not exercising. Any additional exercise, because it is a form of work, burns additional calories. Though not generally thought of, it is a fallacy to think you can exercise off all of your weight. For example, about an hour's worth of fairly intense exercise, such as jogging, would require 14 minutes at a pretty fast pace to burn off the calories in 1 glass of red wine. 1 glass of red wine caloric equivalent is equal to about 3 Oreo cookies. You can do the math from there. When you go on a calorie deficit diet, your body notices. It then secretes hormones that cause you to be hungry and metabolically cause you to tend to store more fat should you consume too much food. It also initiates a process whereupon your muscles will be catabolized to sugar. This is not a good circumstance, and we want to avoid it as much as possible. It is impossible to avoid all of it, but we can mitigate it to a degree over time by adding in some resistance training to your program. Once the carbohydrate addiction is broken and the weight is coming off, we then gradually add carbohydrates back as we increase your exercise regimen. The exercise regimen we recommend during the induction phase, which lasts anywhere from a month to 2 months, is strolling for about 20 to 30 minutes each day. We do not, during the induction phase of this weight loss protocol, recommend heavy types of exercise. We do, however, recommend that you do easy exercise, such as walking a little more per day. Once the addiction is broken and the good carbohydrates are added back in the form of whole grain carbohydrates, we liberalize your activity and encourage you to exercise a minimum of 4 to 5 days a week. Exercise on a regular basis is very important for weight maintenance. Exercise can take the form of aerobic training, which again is essentially walking, cycling, or rowing, and resistance training, which is essentially weightlifting. Resistance training does not have to be weightlifting. Resistance training can involve using your body weight in the form of push-ups or other activities. If you're serious about losing weight and getting on a regular exercise program, a temporary arrangement with a personal trainer at an established and credible gym would be appropriate. In conclusion, understand that a tendency towards obesity is essentially genetically determined at birth. Also realize that the availability of fast foods that are generically unhealthy and lack of activity that has become so pervasive in our society have all contributed to the explosion of obese Americans. The good news is that you can command control of your life and empower yourself to break the vicious cycle of carbohydrate addiction. While you do this, you will give yourself a much better effect and feel better. It has been shown in study after study that patients who live more active lives and have less body fat have fewer illnesses, a healthier life, and less anxiety and depression. Please get started. We encourage you to get with a personal trainer and to look at the list of approved foods below. We've also added foods that you need to avoid. You cannot avoid what you are not aware of. Thank you so much for joining us at mdeduonline.com. We wish you great success in your efforts to reclaim your body, and in doing so, reclaim your life and lower your risk of a heart attack, stroke, diabetes, and all the maladies that go with it. You will be amazed at how much brighter mentally you are and how your outlook on life will change for the better.